The organization Breakthrough T1D, previously known as JDRF, has a mission to accelerate life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and treat type 1 diabetes. Over the decades, Breakthrough has fueled progress across every front of diabetes research, from disease-modifying therapies to cell replacement and regeneration approaches, and immune therapies designed to stop the autoimmune attack that causes T1D in the first place. Breakthrough's impact goes far beyond cure research. The organization has been instrumental in advancing diabetes tech, helping drive early adoption of continuous glucose monitors, funding pivotal studies that supported AID systems, and they continue to invest in tools and treatments that improve life with diabetes. Welcome to the show and happy Diabetes Awareness Month. I'm Justin, I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech news and research with industry leaders and those using the tech themselves. We've got new episodes of this podcast every Monday on podcast platforms and in video on YouTube, and I've got YouTube videos going out on Fridays diving even deeper into the tech and my experiences with it. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Kowalski, CEO of Breakthrough T1D. Aaron is a molecular geneticist and biochemist who's been with the organization since 2004. He's here to share his story from his early involvement in the open source movement to the major milestones he's helped shape at Breakthrough and the exciting work underway right now to bring better therapies and multiple pathways for a cure. In this conversation, Aaron told me that he truly believes that he'll take off his insulin pump while serving as CEO of Breakthrough T1D. And while I hope he's right, I also ask him about the organization's parallel efforts to strengthen AID systems and next generation insulins, ensuring that everyone with diabetes has access to better tools, no matter when a cure arrives or who has access to it. Keep in mind that this episode is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with your healthcare team before making changes to your treatment. Let's get into it. Aaron, welcome to the show. I can't believe you're here. This is awesome.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I was diagnosed with type 1 after 6 months of being misdiagnosed. And it wasn't until I made videos on TikTok that the community diagnosed me.
It's such a sad and common problem that needs major addressing. As you well know, that we used to call diabetes juvenile and adult onset. And nowadays, a lot of people still think with that mentality, and it really can hurt people.
Yeah, I was just talking to a couple nurses yesterday. They were like, yeah, we didn't learn that. I was like, well, now you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's crazy to me. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. You have type 1. You have family members with type 1. How did that dynamic and your own personal experience with type 1 inspire you to get into this space?
Yeah, I'll take you way back. We've been doing this a long time. My brother, so I'm the oldest of 6 kids, big family. My next brother was diagnosed in 1977 at the age of 3. No family history like many families out there. It's kind of was a bolt out of the blue. My parents had no idea what type 1 diabetes was. We were in Blacksburg, Virginia. My dad was a scientist at Virginia Tech. I remember they had to drive a long way to get him care. And then we moved to New Jersey. My dad got a job at J&J as a scientist there. And then I started exhibiting the symptoms. The interesting thing is, in hindsight, I remember saying to my mom, I think I have diabetes. And my mom's like, oh, no, you're just going through puberty. So I'm older now. My brother, he was 3, I'm 13 at the time. And I was drinking a gallon of orange juice a day at this point, kind of melting away and, creating this vicious cycle of pouring sugar into myself and becoming higher and higher blood sugar. And back then we used to use color-based glucose strips. There wasn't even a number-based system back then. So she's like, all right, fine, we'll test. And the strip was just like black. And unlike you, my mom called the doctor. They're like, yeah, he has type 1. You know what you're doing. Just schedule an appointment. Never went to the hospital. It was wild. But my experience, to your question, was really driven by, one, my dad was a scientist and I wanted to go into science. And then 2, my brother Steve, the other type 1 in our family, he had a much different type 1 experience than I did. He has very profound hypoglycemia unawareness, doesn't sense his blood sugar change at all. And despite having two amazing parents who are, really did everything they could for us, had a lot of severe lows. I was in the same bedroom as him. We had bunk beds, and I would have to wait. I would hear him breathing, and I would wake up, and he would be in a severe low and a seizure, do glucagon. Sometimes it would work. Wow. Sometimes he had to go to the emergency room. And it really just spoke to me that if I was going to do the science, like we've got to do better with diabetes. And that's what I did. I went to grad school. Interestingly, my grad school wasn't super diabetes focused. It was much more basic molecular biology. But as soon as I was getting close to wrapping up, amazingly, I'm looking for where I'm going to go. A job at JDRF posted on in a scientific journal for scientists. And I was like, ooh, I just shot off an email. And lo and behold, I got an interview, and now it's 21 years later.
And what had you known about JDRF at the time?
I knew a fair amount. My parents, I wouldn't say they were very involved, but they donated to it was actually JDF. Well, I applied to a JDRF, but it was funny. I couldn't even say JDRF when I applied. And I interviewed, I would say JDF. That was like the original name was the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. So when we were kids, we used to get a magazine, and you may be too young for this, but there used to be a magazine called Countdown. The full name was Countdown to a Cure, but it just read Countdown over the top. And I remember being in high school reading Countdown magazine, like, oh, they're doing this research and this is going on. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to be part of that. In fact, when I came here and I made it into Countdown magazine, it was like a thrill for me. So that was high school. I remember doing walks with my wife, who was my girlfriend in college. We did some walks. And then after grad school, I applied and joined the team.
Well, so you've ran over 20 marathons. And I'm sure, for anyone, that's not easy. But with type 1, there's a lot of challenges that can come there. When you were beginning to do these marathons and using whatever technology you were using, which I'm curious to hear what that was, how did you feel about that technology as it was at that time in those early days? Did you know how it could get better one day? Did you have some of those ideas going on?
Yeah, a little bit more about my trajectory here at Breakthrough T1D. When I started in 2004. In the very first meeting I went to as a scientist, it was in Philadelphia. It was called the Diabetes Technology Society meeting. And it was a meeting of a partner NIH-funded initiative called DirectNet. And this was transformative to me. And I got there and I'm like, what are you guys up to? And there were doctors and nurses who had type 1. They're like, oh, we're testing a new continuous glucose monitor, but they never work. Now, a continuous glucose monitor in my family was like the holy grail. Forget cure, like right then with my brother getting low all the time and with everybody getting low all the time, like having the ability to see your numbers all the time was like, I couldn't even imagine. And then the next day, so this was a 2-day meeting, all these people were like, this actually works. And it was the Abbott Navigator, which was a prequel to obviously Abbott Libre now. This is 2004. I remember thinking, oh my God, if we only had something like this, our lives would be so much better. So fast forward to the running and my exercise. My parents were very big believers that exercise was really important for type 1 people. And we did a lot of exercise growing up with finger poking and with cow and pig insulin. So it was super hard. I played golf in high school competitively. I had a lot of, sad stories of getting low and ruining things. When I started running, it was 2008, the New York City Marathon, the first one I did. It was early days of Dexcom. And I would say that unlike today where, you don't test and you don't confirm, the Dexcom back then, I think the MARD was like 20%. It was not super accurate.
And people know it's 8 about right now.
Yeah, it's way different.
Wow.
And the other thing that was frustrating back then was you got a lot of question marks. So if it wasn't giving you a stable reading, it would give you question marks. It would drop out. For me, the big thing, even with the MARD being so bad, it was very helpful to look at trends. The glass half full it was so helpful when I was running and I would see these like drops, or I would see I was high. And even with all the intermittent data, it helped me. It helped me a lot. Now, I will say I had some real sad stories where, like, I used to run to try to qualify for the Boston Marathon and like run. Like, one of my biggest disappointments ever is I had this flame out. You know, I'm looking at your numbers in the background here, and one of my early good friends in running was Lane Despero, one of the early Night Scout, created the early Night Scout.
He was on the show a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So Lane and here's a digression. And it's related to this very experience. He calls me one day and he says, you should come out and run this marathon with me. It's called Ojai to Ocean. And it's a gradual downhill. It's a Boston qualifier. It'll be awesome. So I'm like, yeah. I get out there. I stay at his house. And he goes, oh, you got to see this cool thing I created. I call it a Night Scout. And he had, for his son Hayden, these iPads.
The PC Sentry.
Yeah. And that was my first, I had been in the hacking of the sensors before that, but it percolated over to Lane. But during that race, I woke up the morning of, and I felt like my blood sugar. So there's the pro, very helpful. The con was that day, I was trying to run a 3:15, which would have qualified me for Boston, which for me was super fast. But I was in super good shape. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I wake up in the morning and I felt like my blood sugar was high. Look at my Dexcom, it was 140. And I'm like, test, 340. I'm like, oh. And I can't remember which number this was, like if it was G4.
Could you calibrate at the time?
You could.
Okay.
You could. But by then, I missed, and I flamed out super hard in that race. So the sensors and technology, hugely helpful, but it was a learning curve, especially in the early days of sensing.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. So far this year, I've taken about 15 flights, so I know a thing or two when it comes to packing for type 1 diabetes. One thing I love about Omnipod 5 is that all the supplies come in one small, convenient package. No additional packages to remember for tubing or infusion sets, which helps me travel with confidence and ease. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. Again, that's omnipod.com/diabetic. In 2004, that's when you would land at JDRF. So we kind of heard how you got there. And then soon after, in 2005, you would play a pivotal role in the JDRF Artificial Pancreas Project. Tell us what this was and what your role was with it.
Yeah, I could talk for hours about this. It's a fond memory for me. But back then, you have to appreciate JDRF was focused on curing, and we still are. That's always been the North Star, but really didn't focus at all on treating. We had some research on hypoglycemia and complications, but nothing much more than that. And my job was diabetic complications, including hypo. So I see this navigator, and I'm like, I go back to my boss, and I said, we're going to fix hypo. There's a CGM. And my boss said, we don't do that. I'm like, well, we don't do that? I think we're trying to fix hypoglycemia here. No. We fund the science. We need to understand what causes hypo unawareness. And we had a lot of grants to try to understand, why do some people get low, others don't? Low by meaning cognitively impaired low. And I was like, whoa. That's crazy to me, because there's something coming that could fix all of this. And lo and behold, another guy that Lane worked with and became CEO here, but was on our board, a guy named Jeffrey Brewer, he was rabble-rousing at the board level. He was on our board that technology should be able to help bridge to a cure. And we got connected through Kelly Close. We were like peas in a pod. We were like, we've got to do this. And this was, for me, it started out as CGM. And I went to our board and I was like, we've got to support this. It's hugely impactful. And then we learned Dexcom was coming down the pike. So I learned about Abbott, and then I learned about Dexcom, not approved yet, neither. And the board's like, oh, we don't know. And a scientist I worked with, one of my bosses, he's like, it's not just about CGM. You really need to go after closing the loop, because that's what's going to really drive the impact. So back in 2005, we convinced our board to fund a project. We called it the JDRF Artificial Pancreas Project, to try to help show the community that CGM can work. Believe it or not, in 2004, most doctors were super anti-CGM.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Crazy. And then that we could close the loop, which was even more controversial. Picture an MARD, sensor error range being 20%, and we're saying we're going to dose insulin. People were like, you're crazy, dumbest idea ever. There's a doctor who worked on this, Boris Kovachev at UVA, a mathematician, and we always recollect to this meeting at NIH where Al Mann got up, Minimed, Al Mann. He said, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard, and you're going to kill people. Now, Al and I became friends. Al Mann
said that?
Yeah, in the meeting.
Oh, my goodness.
And we pressed forward with that project. And fast forward to today, it's a huge point of pride because, of course, CGM couldn't live without. And virtually every system that's on the market, the work that we funded is baked into these pumps, which is amazing.
That's incredible. And thank you for pushing for that. Yeah. I had Dr. Grazia Aleppo on the show, and she told me all about the history of CGM and how she was seen as a crazy person for believing in CGM. So thank you to the crazy people who believed in it, because I couldn't imagine my life without it. And I'm sure a lot of listeners too. So this study, or this work, would also go on to become like a mold or a model for your future work, right? So what did you learn from this, and how did you kind of continue with that? How did it make future work, I guess, easier or more streamlined?
I think the thing that we learned throughout that process is, back then, we funded a lot of academic research. And academic research is the foundation of virtually all of the discoveries that become breakthroughs for people with type 1 or other diseases. But what was missing, and it actually ties into where we are today, curing type 1, is a pathway to making academic/discovery research real. That is a multi-stakeholder, multi-step, complicated process that we didn't know how to do. And by that, I mean, what does making it real mean? If you have a project like Artificial Pancreas, and back then the issue was, could you create an algorithm that controlled a pump and had a CGM and make a commercial product? What was going on was there were no algorithms to do it. Medtronic had one. It was actually funded by NIH and Breakthrough T1D, JDRF back then. Mm-hmm. It was an internal program. They paid some scientists, a guy named Gary Stow, Kirsten Rebrin, two amazing early champions in this field, but it wasn't supported. It was funded in like an academic. And what we needed to do is show it could be done. But then there was the transfer, like Medtronic ultimately needed to bring that to the market. And we started realizing, oh man, we need to work with these companies, because the companies are the ones that are going to deliver to the community. When we did, one of the key things in the Artificial Pancreas Project on the CGM side was the JDRF CGM trial. Nobody believed in CGM, and we funded this trial to test all three CGMs. It was Medtronic, Dexcom, and Abbott back then, to show the clinical community that they could work, to show payers they should pay for them, and doctors they should prescribe to them. And we call it the pipeline here, going from discovery research to a company through FDA or other European, Canadian, Australian regulators, through reimbursement pathways. If you can't afford it, you're not going to get a life-changing breakthrough. Your doctor prescribing it, if your doctor doesn't prescribe it, you don't get any benefit, all the way into the hands of the community. And that was and still is a learning process. But I think it's shown us today, when we look at cures, and I'm sure we'll talk about cures, you've got to have all these ducks in a row. And if the ducks aren't in a row, people don't benefit. And that was a huge learning process.
Yeah, so that CGM trial would go on to help push the fact that CGMs are useful. But there was still an issue for getting it to be covered, right? Or even to allow people to use it non-adjunctively without their blood glucose meter. So is that where the Replace BG study comes in to show that we can not only use these continuous glucose monitors to dose insulin, but we don't need to calibrate these things. We don't need to check it with the blood glucose meter.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of think of it as two steps. When we did the CGM trial, it reported out in 2008. I was fortunate to be very involved in that. And that was really about driving reimbursement and acceptance of CGM. They were still very much calibrated at that point. And we went, I remember that first year, it was something like 10% of people in private insurance had coverage. Within the 12-month period, we got it up to like 70% in private. You know, United, Aetna, Cigna, those kind of payer plans. We did struggle a lot with Medicare and Medicaid. And that's where Replace BG and a number of efforts, I mean, I think we spent over $10 million working on different efforts to try to get CGM coverage for Medicare patients. I mean, it's one of my greatest joys in my career is when we got over that hump, because I felt like it was such an injustice to our Medicare population who has the biggest risk of hypo and injuries due to hypo.
They need it the most.
Who needed it the most and couldn't afford it because many people are on fixed incomes. That battle was one of the most frustrating things I've ever gone through in my career. Because the feeling was, well, first, that it was too risky to use without a calibration. And then second, that it was duplicative with a calibration. So there were kind of two issues we were facing. And it used to make me nuts, the first issue, because I used to say, listen, here's the deal. When people use these devices, they have fewer highs and lows. Like FDA and others were trying to create a box in which like there was some preset accuracy number that was the like perfect number to be like replacement. And I was like, we've already figured this out. People aren't testing and they're getting low and high less, including severe. So, but it was a fight, and that study was a huge part of winning that fight. And once we got over the hump, you know, the doubling up, we also showed cost effectiveness with Medicare. So, you know, ultimately, again, it comes back to if you don't have coverage or your doctor behind this, people don't benefit, and access is everything.
So, like you said, Breakthrough T1D was working with Medtronic and companies to create this artificial pancreas. At the same time or around then, the open source community was doing their thing and creating OpenAPS, DIY Loop, these apps and algorithms that were already doing it. People were using it. Were you using it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very fortunate to be with the very earliest, you know, there's a lot of debate who did what first. But one of my friends here in New York, it was the first I ever saw, and as far as I can tell, the first person who hacked the Dexcom, Brian Maslish. He came to my office one day and he's like, look what I did. And he had a cell phone. I mean, it was amazing. And he has, his wife and son have type 1. And he had his son's numbers on his phone with a predictive algorithm showing where the blood sugar was going. And I was like, this is crazy. How did you do it? And he's like, it was easy. There's no security on this thing. And I cracked into it. And once that word got out, again, you know, depending on who you talk to, it doesn't matter. Like it started this ecosystem, Lane, Dana Lewis, you know, all these folks. Then I did this, you may have seen this article. A guy named Dan Hurley did an article in Wired magazine about the DIY community a long time ago. And he said, he was interviewing me for it, and he said, do you think anybody will ever hack a pump? And I was like, yeah, I've already worn one. Now, this was super early. His mind was blown. But the person who didn't want to talk about it, who did it. And so then that word got out that the pump was hacked, and we saw kind of the Dana Lewis camp and then the Loop people, kind of two camps form around the early solutions to do DIY closed loop. I remember Brandon Arbeiter, who I think you've had on. He was on our board, and he came to a board meeting. He goes, "Aaron, you've got to do. It's amazing. It's amazing." He was a looper, and I saw it. And I was doing all this work with FDA back then, and FDA hated this. They hated it. And I went to our head of our DC team, and I told her, "I'm going to do it." And she goes, "No, you can't. Like, they'll flip out." And I said, "Listen, Cynthia, I have a responsibility to my family more than the FDA. And I firmly believe I'll have better health if I do this. So I'm just doing it." It felt very Wild West, but it was so transformative. And not only did it help me and my brother and so many people, it really helped push the field so much faster than I think would have happened otherwise. It allowed FDA to see it was possible. They just kept blowing past every milestone, and I don't think we would be where we are today if it weren't for the DIY community.
Absolutely. And they're still doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe not as powerful or huge as it once was, but it is still advancing tech today. I mean, people aren't bolusing for meals. They're using these apps. So, and it's setting the standard for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's very frustrating to me, and I talk to the companies about this all the time, that our hands are still so tied with the commercial systems. It kills me that we're not doing on-the-fly insulin sensitivity modifications or insulin to carb ratios, data-driven basal rates. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. And that's why Breakthrough T1D, then JDRF, Helmsley, the Tallman Family Foundation, we funded Tide Pool to go through FDA, because I firmly believe that this world needs to be a plug-and-play world, that people with diabetes should be able to pick which device is best for them, pump, algorithm, and UI and sensor, and that those UI people should be iterating way faster than is happening in the commercial systems right now. I just went on SQL Twist, so I'm using Loop, but it's a constrained version, and everybody knows that. It's still good, but I sure wish I could do more. So I give the field credit, like these DIY, and many of them are friends, for continuing to push. We need to continue to push.
Yeah. Now let's get to the cure, because I know 20% of my audience just skipped to this point in the video. They want to hear about the cure.
Yeah.
So how has Breakthrough T1D been involved in type 1 cure research over the last couple decades? Kind of paint us a picture as to like the work so far.
Yeah, I was just talking to some of our team here on a Zoom, and they were asking about where we are with cure research. And I'll just digress for a second. One of our great partners are Steve Edelman and Jeremy Pettis at TCOYD. I said to the team, one of the hard talks I used to have to give every year was at their one conference with all the adults with type 1, and they used to ask me to give a research update, including cures. And everybody in the type 1 community is sensitive about when a cure is going to come, because they feel they've been overpromised and underdelivered. And I get it. Like when I was diagnosed, I was told a cure is around the corner. So I always start that, which is to your question, how long we've been involved and what's going on. The reason a cure has been around the corner for so long is we've been able to cure people for almost 30 years with islet transplantation. And I used my brother as an example earlier of somebody who has severe hypoglycemia issues. We had a person on our board who had severe hypoglycemia issues. And when I joined Breakthrough, then JDRF, she was on our board. She had an islet transplant. She was off insulin. So going back to the 90s and early 2000s, you were meeting people who were getting low in front of you and then coming off their insulin. And they will flat out tell you they're cured. We have a guy on our board right now who has a whole pancreas transplant. He says, I used to have diabetes. He's been off insulin for 15 years. 0 insulin.
Wow.
5 A1C. So the reason the cure has always been around the corner is because the science was there, but it kind of comes back to your artificial pancreas question earlier. The problem with those early cures is they weren't scalable and they were happening in academic labs. And I think so I used to go to this TCOID meeting and everybody would be sitting with their arms crossed when I would talk about cure. And I'm like, guys, I get it. Like we missed on this, but it wasn't malice the reason they missed. You had amazing scientists and doctors telling you they could do it, witnessing it was done, and thinking, of course, if I can do one person, why can't I do a bunch more? The problem, there were kind of two big problems. One is it required somebody to die for it to work. It was an organ transplant, cellular, but that's not a great business model. We see this in any organ transplants. There's waiting lists, it's hard, it's expensive. And then, of course, you require immunosuppression. So back in the 90s and early 2000s, especially, Breakthrough T1D, JDRF got involved in starting to try to address these issues. They funded all that work on islet transplants, showed it could be done, but they did realize, those early scientists and volunteers, that they needed a better scalable solution. And that was stem cell. And, this is, if you talk to Doug Melton, kind of the pioneer in this field, 2 kids with type 1, changed his lab to really focus exclusively on curing type 1. He will tell you, he thought it would be easier and faster. It's taken about 25 years. That said, here we are with Vertex in a pivotal trial for approval of a stem cell therapy, what we call manufactured islets, where these cells are curing people. And the thing I would say to your audience and to you, and I say all the time, is the thing that's really important to me is there's no such thing as a singular cure. Just like when we started the Artificial Pancreas Project, I published a paper, I don't know, it was like 2006 or 7, that a lot of people cite, and it wasn't rocket science, but it essentially said this: there's not going to be a singular artificial pancreas. What we're going to do is we're probably going to see a series of more and more sophisticated approaches to dose insulin to drive people with a better blood sugar control. And the whole idea back then for me was actually, with our fight with FDA, how could we deliver some interim solutions showing FDA you didn't need to have a fully closed loop? Well, of course, today we have a bunch of different AP systems, AID systems, and that's great. They meet the needs and they're different and they're evolving and they're getting better. Similarly with cells, that Vertex product could be out in 2028. Curative for some people, not for everybody.
With immunosuppression?
With immunosuppression. So a lot of people are scared about that, but I'll tell you, I think this is going to be a monumental step forward because, for example, we estimate there are 10,000, unfortunately, tragically, type 1 people in the United States alone who have had kidney transplants due to diabetic nephropathy. They are already on immunosuppressants. I know a relatively young lady who's a big supporter of ours, her parents, and she lost her kidneys, actually, surprisingly, not to diabetic kidney disease, but to a very rare other form of kidney problems. She is on immunosuppression right now. In hopefully 1.5 to 2 years, she could walk away from her diabetes. She'll still need the immunosuppression for her kidney. So why not take it for the cells too? By the way, the guy on our board who has a whole pancreas transplant, everybody's scared of immunosuppression. My belief is the FDA should, I hate to say stay out of that. Like the trial, you have to show that you have severe hypo problems to get into this trial. I think that's too restrictive. I think you and I and our doctors should decide the risk of immunosuppression versus the risk of diabetes and let us figure it out. So if that's the case, in a couple of years, hopefully we'll have that decision to make. And of course, our goal is immunosuppression free, and that's where we're pouring a ton of resources and effort.
Is that where Project ACT comes, Accelerate Cell Therapies?
Yes. So Project ACT is an acronym we use for a major initiative within Breakthrough T1D that is Accelerate Cell Therapies. I'm all in on that. This is a pathway for me to take my pump off, and my brother and you and all our type 1 community, that if we can eliminate the need for immunosuppression, we're kind of game over here. I think it's possible. And even with some immunosuppression, I think there is massive steps forward in the care of people with type 1 if you have what we call endogenous insulin production and glucagon and somatostatin and amylin, all the hormones that are made in the islet. So Project ACT is a full court press. It's really modeled after what we did with the Artificial Pancreas Project to do everything we can to fill in the blanks that's going to move this field down towards wide utility in the community.
Have you heard about Diabetic All Access? It's our premium subscription for our top listeners. With that, you gain access to exclusive interviews, industry analysis articles, and our monthly live events. We just had one. It was all about diabetes tech and advancements that are coming in the near future and even further. Let's play a live clip from that. Omnipod 6, the next version, they're already testing out, at least on the software side. The evolution algorithm is the code name. They already have pretty promising results. They've been testing it with people with type 1 and type 2. This algorithm is meant to be a hands-free algorithm where you're not bolusing or pre-bolusing for food. They found that people who tried the evolution algorithm without bolusing had a time in range of around 52 to 64%. To see the full 40-minute live event and our full catalog of videos and articles, you can subscribe to Diabetic All Access at diabetic.info/all access. Again, that's diabetic.info/all access. It is because of your support that we're able to keep our independent journalism going. Thank you so much. Back to the show. So we've done a couple episodes in the past that people should listen to where we dive really deep into many of the cure research that's going on now. But can you just bullet point a bit some of the work that's going on now, what's interesting about it, or where we're at with that, with those studies?
Yeah, we have 3 kind of big areas that we're focused on. Number 1, we call cell protect. That is, how do you make the cells invisible? Could be encapsulation. You probably saw the Sana data. Company Sana, that's part of our venture fund, is doing gene-edited cells. We think that's probably the holy grail. So taking away or reducing immunosuppression. We're funding another company called Eledon that is doing a much milder immunosuppressant that I think I would do. I think the side effects of diabetes are probably much worse than the side effects of this drug. So I could envision Vertex V1, and then you have these companies coming with, maybe it's the cells with less immunosuppression and of course a gene-edited cell. So that's what we call cell protect. Cell source is another piece, which is Vertex has their cells, which seem to be functional, but we're big believers that competition drives innovation. We want multiple shots on goal. So I want to see multiple companies doing this, just like there's multiple device companies out there. The other part of this cell source is the manufacturability of this is hard. Meaning, you may have seen, we had news with Civica, with the insulin project we're co-supporting. Affordable Lantus coming to the market, biosimilar Atlantis, Jan 1. I went down and toured that facility. Making insulin is super complicated. It's super hard. Building that factory, getting it up to speed has been a huge lift. Try doing that for cells. It's a whole nother level of science. So we're funding, for example, a big project with the DOD in New Hampshire with Dean Kamen, guy who created the very first insulin pump and the sequel pump. They are doing a huge project on how do you take this cell manufacturing from, he calls it grandma's chicken noodle soup to Campbell's chicken noodle soup.
Big upgrade. Well, actually, grandma's chicken noodle soup is where it's at, right?
Well, no, we want, grandma's is great, but we want how many people, it might be great for you and me, but it's not going to be great for everybody with diabetes. If we have to make it in the kitchen, it's going to take a long time to get to the 1.5 million type 1s in the United States. So a big bucket is protect the cells, scale the cells, and then we think of it as where the cells are in your body. You probably know that the Vertex product is it the cells are infused into a vein in your leg. They sit in your liver. Sana's injecting them into the forearm. Other groups are doing them into what we call the peritoneal cavity, where your stomach and intestines and central organs sit. So these are major initiatives. I tend to think that Cell Protect and scalability are the two biggest issues we need to resolve. But I also believe that these are solvable problems. Like, we are now getting into an area where, with really smart people and all of the advances in molecular biology and biotechnology, that we're going to knock these out. And I truly believe I'll take my pump off as CEO.
Wow. So, cure aside, when it comes to delaying the onset, we've got Tzield right now, teplizumab. And that is cleared for stage 2 of type 1 diabetes, which is before you're like completely dependent on insulin, but there is degradation. Stage 3, there was just news that dropped this week about there being a potential clearance for stage 3, which means you are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I think you need some insulin support. Can you explain to us what that could be or what that could mean?
Yeah, and just for all the listeners, when we talk about stage 1, 2, and 3, this is a relatively new, although we've been working on this forever. We call it the staging of diabetes, and we couldn't be there with Tzield if not for this staging. So just to be really clear, what it means is type 1 diabetes is happening in your body well before the time you're diagnosed. So you being diagnosed initially as type 2 and then as type 1, that progression was very likely years and years in the making. And we can test people now for the markers of that happening. We call them autoantibodies. Some of your listeners may have done TrialNet. We're supporting a number of programs around the world. You can see if you have the beginnings of type 1 diabetes. We call that stage 1. Stage 1 is multiple autoantibodies with normal blood sugar. Now, what people don't appreciate is, unfortunately, if you have 2 or more antibodies, the likelihood of getting type 1 diabetes is almost 100%. We're doing everything we can to lower that to 0 eventually, hopefully. What Tzield does is it intervenes at stage 2. And what stage 2 means is you're starting to lose some of your responsivity to meal challenges, usually meal challenges. You have abnormal blood sugars, postprandial, post-meal spikes, maybe even some fasting blood sugar issues. It means you have beta cell function, but it's going away. And then stage 3 is you need insulin. So stage 2, the Tzield delays type 1 for on average about 3 years. We have amazing stories of how impactful that's been for families, kids who've been diagnosed at stage 2, making it through college without needing insulin after Tzield. It's the first drug ever to treat the disease itself. So stage 3 came out this week, and we've been doing a ton of work behind the scenes on this. There's data to show that even in stage 3, and everybody knows there's a honeymoon phase, that there's likely in the bulk of people still some beta cells making insulin. Not enough to control your blood sugar. Obviously, you need insulin. But the data shows that you can preserve some of that, what we call C-peptide, which is insulin production, much longer if with Tzield treatment. And what happened, for the folks listening who don't know this, is the U.S. government created a fast track program for certain high impact, high potential drugs to go very, very quickly through a regulatory process if they're deemed safe. Tzield was put on that list. So we're super excited about that. We've been working with the research community, with Sanofi, who makes the drug, to be ready, because that could be really impactful in our community.
Many people in this community, as you alluded to earlier, are jaded that there ever will be a cure. And even me, I'm apprehensive as to when the cure will come. So I do hope that there will still be innovation on things that we have right now. One of those being insulin. You go to the conferences, the diabetes conferences, none of these insulin companies are talking about insulin. They're talking about GLP-1s. It seems like they've forgotten about insulin and aren't working to get us to an even better one, a smart insulin, whatever that is. That worries me. Is there work going into that, is Breakthrough part of that work anyway?
Yeah, we funded smart insulin since the very beginning. The first smart insulin concept, Dr. Sanjoy Dutta, who heads up our research, and I'm looking across the river here from Manhattan to New Jersey to Rahway, where Merck is. Merck actually acquired a smart insulin that we were funding. Unfortunately, it didn't make it to the market, but we have been really pushing on smart insulin and insulin innovation. I see it as much faster and smart. I'm a big Afrezza user. If we had a super fast acting insulin in our pump, life would be immensely easier. So both of those are huge priorities of ours. I think the challenge, and when I always use the horse race analogy, who's out in front, is insulin has been hard. It's a hard drug to make, modifying the insulin. It's subcutaneous, it's a big protein, but we haven't given up. I think both Lilly and Novo have talked about having live programs with glucose responsive insulins. So that is very high on our radar. And I'm super committed to making sure Breakthrough T1D is right there driving better treatments in the face of cure until there are cures, knowing that even with all these advances with the devices, having your blood sugar in the background on your watch, AID, it's still hard, and we can do better.
And the same goes for technology. We were talking about how open source is still pushing forward, but technology still feels so freaking slow.
Yeah.
And there's work going on by Lane Desborough and others to speed up innovation and make these updates faster. Is Breakthrough still working with these companies? And if so, how to speed up this innovation to make the tech that we have today and the people who can't afford the cure, even when that comes out, who still need to remain on the tech, to make that stronger?
Yeah, we have an amazing team here working on tech and better treatments, led by a doctor named John Rosen, who's a super genius. And we usually start with what are the issues that are meaningful to people with type 1 and how could we fix them? One of the big ones is bolusing. And of course, mealtime. We haven't figured out mealtime. Some of the AID systems are getting there, but I still think there's work. I've debated Rehan Lal and a lot of these folks, at least with my diet. I don't know that I can fully get there, but that's a big issue. Size, affordability, adjunctive therapies like glucagon, amylin, GLPs, SGLTs, other analytes. We have insulin sensing and continuous ketone sensing is a big focus of ours. If we had a continuous insulin sensor, that would be amazing. So we have all these different projects that we look at, and then we have to determine what's our role vis-a-vis the companies and other funders. But treatment is still, we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on making tech and the drugs that go into working with the tech much better.
Yeah, and it sounds like from what you said, similar to the cure, it could be a multi-prong approach also with the technology, where insulin pumps can only get so strong, but if they're taken with another drug, then it's automated, you do nothing, right?
Yeah.
It could look like that.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get there, but we forever have been working on co-formulated insulin and amylin. A long time ago, I was on Similan, the amylin analog, very hard to dose. I gave up on it after a few months, but it's a hormone that's co-secreted from the beta cell with insulin that's not replaced. You take it, you get much shorter postprandial spikes, and it's now off patent. So we've been looking God, if you could put that in with insulin, the potential, we funded a lot of research here up at McGill, for example, that you can get pretty darn close to a fully closed loop with an amylin insulin co-formulation. Okay, now you need a company to get at that. Interestingly, you may have seen Novo. Novo is all over the map right now, but they have a drug for obesity that's an insulin amylin approach. Could we bring that into type 1? So our team is constantly looking, whether it's GLP, insulin, amylin, SGLTs, how do we do better? And by the way, the other thing around these other drugs is all these complications benefits. We're really, really focused on that. The fact that the GLPs and SGLT inhibitors reduce the speed of kidney disease progression, heart disease, better outcomes, is just another reason. You talk about glucose, but you also talk about metabolism broadly. People with type 1 are still at elevated risk of heart attacks and kidney failure. So if we can make your A1C better, but also reduce your risk of having a stroke or a heart attack or kidney disease, that is like a huge win for us.
Yeah, that all sounds so fantastic. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was so great to hear your story. You are an absolute legend, and I love seeing how your story connects to Lane and all the other people in the space and connecting, with all of my shows. So it was so great having you here. I look forward to watching Breakthrough T1D and getting more involved myself with the organization to help fund and push all of this incredible work.
It's this an amazing team, this community. The one thing that we're always aligned on is we need better. And that's a powerful group of people all over the world fighting that fight. So I am super grateful for all you're doing to highlight progress, raise awareness. It's a team effort. And you've been a great champion. Your story is an amazing one. So thanks for having me on. It was a real honor.
Wow, what an exciting time for diabetes research, and I'm so happy to hear that Breakthrough T1D is leading the charge and investing in so many different approaches, so hopefully we can find treatments that work better for other people. What do you think of these? Let me know in the comments which of these you think have the most promise. Thank you all for listening. I'm Justin, and I'll talk to you later.